Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is I was going to say long awaited, but that may not be the correct term, but it's the return of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast. And I suppose there's only really one way for me to start, and that's with an apology. I know at the end of the very last episode, I did say that I would be coming back every 2 weeks because it's the off season and whatever. And that turned out to be a good couple of months. I hope you can understand, though, it was for slightly good reasons. Basically, me and my wife had a child, and if there's anyone out there that is a parent, you will know that your time management, your free time, your availability to do any of this, especially during the first couple of months, is slim to nothing. So yeah, I had to take the summer off effectively, but I am back and I am glad to be back to be able to talk about the NFL on what is, what we are recording this on the Tuesday of the first week of the NFL season. And today I am going to keep it relatively short and well, maybe not short, but keep it relatively simple. Today's just going to be a prediction episode. I'm not going to be going too much into the details of the big goings and comings and goings of the off season. I will be mentioning the obvious and the biggest one when we come around to it. I think you know exactly what I'm going to be talking about, and that will be coming later on when I get to the predictions. But it's just going to be that. It's going to be the division winners. Well, not well winners by default, but it'll be the division standings, and then as always my predictions for the various awards that come in at the end of the season. But before we jump into that, it wouldn't be the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast without me doing the usual, which is as always just saying thank you very much for listening, and especially if you stuck with us over that long summer hiatus. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Don't forget you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on, and then don't forget we are also on social media. We are at Baldwin Sports YouTube, at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and we are at MRB Sports Media on Twitter. So feel free to give us a like and a follow there. And if you are returning, as always, thank you very much for your continued support. Right, no point beating around the bush. Let's get right into it. So, if you were with us last year, you will remember that I did this in a very basic way, and perhaps it's slightly school childish, or because that's just the way I remember learning it in school. But I'm going to go AFC first, then NFC, and I'm going to go north, south, east, west. I know that's not directly as it is around a compass, but I just remember that always being, whenever you look for those were the points to find: north, south, east, west. I don't know why we never went north, east, southwest, but that was just the way it's always stuck in my head. So that is the way that I'm going to do it this time. Now, sometimes I'm going to go from the top first, and sometimes I'm going to start at the bottom. It's going to depend on the division, and it's going to depend on the talking points surrounding it, shall we say? So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, AFC North. We're going to kick off with We're going to start at the top, and I think it's the Ravens will win, so they're going to come first. Then it's the Bengals. Then it's the Steelers. Then it's the Browns. Now, I know that may not be the most hot take or the most controversial. It's just, I don't see anything from the teams that make me vastly think there's going to be any major changes in the order. You look at the standings last year. The Ravens won it. Then the Steelers came in second, got their wild card place. Then the Bengals came in, and then the Browns, were the Browns. You look at the top. I don't see the Ravens, they haven't lost anyone major. They're one of the best run, best well constructed squads, rosters in the whole NFL. They're going to be up there. The Browns, still an absolute basket case of a disaster, especially at the quarterback position. They will be at the bottom. So you are really looking at the Steelers and the Bengals to fight out for that second spot. Now, I am not overly confident about what Aaron Rodgers is going to be doing at quarterback for the Steelers. Yes, they made some big moves. Yes, they made some un-Steelers like moves, as many of the media people have mentioned, going out and paying, a big draft capital for DK Metcalf and, and then paying him a big salary. Not really what you expect the Steelers to do, but that's the way they're going to go. Losing Minka Fitzpatrick. I think that was a bit of a bit of an odd thing for them to do. But overall, it's still the same old Steelers. And I just can't see there being a big leap from them to maybe challenge the Ravens at the top of the division. So I think they're going to stay roughly the same. The only thing is, I can't see the Bengals being as bad as they were at the start of last season, then having to play catch up as they did, as they did towards the end. I think they're going to be slightly more, honed in. at the start. That's going to get them a better start, and then they won't need to be scrambling around at the end of the season to go and get to make it into the playoffs. So I think that's really the only swap from the standings last season. I think the Bengals are going to overtake the Steelers. I do still think the Steelers may sneak into the wild card at maybe a seventh seed, but if they miss the playoffs with a winning record, I also would not be totally surprised. I just do not feel inspired by Aaron Rodgers. I just really don't. The age, what he's going to potentially do with the locker room. You've seen the sort of damage he's caused in Green Bay and with the New York Jets. I just don't see that coming out as a very positive thing. So that's why I think the Steelers are going to maybe have a slight drop off, but still be in and around the space where you expect the Steelers to be. And then you just have the Bengals just slightly overtaking them. I don't think that's too controversial of a take to make. Moving on now, we go to the AFC South, where I've got the Texans coming in first. I've got the Jaguars coming in second. Then I have the Titans third and the Colts fourth. And I know it is a bit cliche, and I know it's the obvious one, and I would like to go into further details about why I think all this, but it is only a half-hour show, and football is won and lost by the quarterbacks. But a lot of these things you can just boil down to the quarterback situation. Look at the ranking of quarterbacks in the AFC South. I think that's pretty standard. You look at what CJ Stroud's doing with Houston, and the rest of the squad as well. Again, I don't want to put it just on CJ Stroud, but you look at him, then you look at Trevor Lawrence, probably the second best quarterback in the division. Then you go down. The Titans, could Cam Ward be a star in the making? I think he is. Then what's going on with the Colts, with Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson and whatever's going on there? I don't feel any confidence coming out of the Colts when it comes to the quarterback situation and the rest of the roster as well. There are some good players scattered around there. I'm not going to deny it, but just as a vague aside, I just don't feel any. That's just a badly run organization. If the way they've handled Anthony Richardson and then Daniel Jones just speaks of an overall bad management from the rest of the organization. So I think they come fourth. Cam Ward, I think there's a roughly good potential Titan squad. I think he may be able to elevate them slightly. So that's why I go third. Then again, Texans steaming away at the top of the division. That's why the Jaguars have to then come in second. Again, I don't want to go any further into this, but sometimes it can be just as simple as that. So that's why I'm doing it that way. And with that, we move to the AFC East, where I'll switch it up and I'll go bottom to top. And again, most of it's surrounding the quarterback. The Jets are going to finish bottom because they are the New York Jets. The Miami Dolphins are going to finish third in my eyes. Then it's the New England Patriots. Then it's the Buffalo Bills. I don't think we need to talk about the Bills and the Jets. Pretty much, I think that's pretty much standard. I think everyone knows why they would be in the position they are. The interesting thing is the Patriots and the Dolphins. Now, I really like the Dolphins as a squad, as a roster. I think they do have the potential, if things fell their way, to be a really good squad. If they got off to a really hot start in the start of the season, to build up enough of those momentums, because we know what their record is when it gets cold. Is that like 0-12 when the number jumps below 40 degrees? So we know when it comes to December and January, there is that weakness for them. So they have to get it all out of the way at the start of the year. So in a normal season, I would put them second. But I just think you look at the dysfunction that's going on around them with the Tyreek Hill situation. And again, Mike McDaniel, with the way he's conducted himself in the press conferences over this, does that look like a coach that's buttoned up and is really doing the best that he can do for all his team? That, again, just does not strike confidence in me that he's the man and I do think that Mike McDaniel I think he's a very good coach. I think, he could be I'm not saying he's the next Bill Belichick, but he's someone who I think can have a long career in the league. But when he acts the way he has done this off season, you kind of feel like he may be running it. He may be running on borrowed time, and it would not surprise me if he's the first head coach to lose their job this season. And then again, so that's going to drop them down a bit. I do think the Patriots are moving up in the world with Mike Vrabel, who I do think is a very good coach in charge there. So I think they're going to overtake the Dolphins, and Dolphins miss the playoffs. And again, that could cause a whole bunch of changes around them, and then the Patriots move up again. I could see them very easily sneaking into a wild card spot. And to wrap up the AFC, we obviously have the West. Chiefs 1, Broncos 2, Chargers 3, Raiders 4. Chiefs is number one, still one of the best teams in the AFC, and until someone from the AFC West pulls up a decent enough overall squad to challenge them, that is the way it's going to at least start. So the Chiefs win it. The Raiders, I think there are, again, a lot of questions around that organization. I do think the likes of Pete Carroll are going to take some time to get used to things. I do think Geno Smith is a good-ish quarterback for them, but is he gonna be able to challenge the likes of Bo Nix and Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes? No, he's not. And then the rest of the squad. Again, there's a good potential with the Raiders, but I just think in that division, in a very competitive division, I can very easily see them falling well behind. So that makes that job easier. The real question then becomes the Broncos and the Chargers, both of whom, made the playoffs last season. How do those two teams sort of stack up against each other? I think both have made some pretty good improvements, but I just think, like I talked about how big a quarterback is, I do think the offensive line does play a big part in how well a quarterback does. So as a result, I think with the injury to Rashawn Slater, that might just be like a one game difference that might in the end just make that, Chargers last year were 11-6, Broncos were 10-7. Could I see, one, two of those games being flipped just as a result of, one of the main offensive tackles being out? I do think that's likely. So I just think switch those twos around, and that puts that puts the AFC West in the situation it is. And with that, we move on to the other conference. We move on to the NFC. And as I did with the AFC, we'll start with the North. And I'm going to go for the Lions at number 1, the Packers at number 2, the Vikings at 3, and the Bears at 4. Where to start with that? I'll start with the Lions because a bit like the Chiefs and the Ravens, until someone comes up with a better roster to dethrone them in within their division, I think that's the way it is going to be. Plus, when you add in the fact that I don't see how the Detroit Lions are going to have a second straight season with the amount of injuries that they did last year, which ultimately I do think proved costly. If everyone's healthy, I do think they carry on the same way. There's as a squad, as a roster, brilliant. I don't think how can anyone stop them again with that baseline level, and then considering they're going to be getting some of their good players back, it's easy to make them number 1. Then it was a choice between the Packers and the Vikings for 2 and 3. And I was so tempted to put the Vikings just on the maybe the hope that I do think JJ McCarthy, with a year learning behind Sam Darnold and Kevin O'Connell, a good NFL quarterback, not great, but a good NFL quarterback, and a very good offensive minded head coach in Kevin O'Connell. I would give him the benefit of the doubt. Then the Packers made the trade for Micah Parsons. He is someone that can single-handedly win you 2 games, I think. Again, we talk about the importance of the quarterback. I think, again, you look at the state of the Packers as a team. Last year, 11-6. Maybe you see a little bit of a decline with the Minnesota Vikings because, JJ McCarthy, this is effectively his rookie year. I think he'll be okay, but still a rookie. There will still be some learning curves. So drop them down a game or two, and then the Packers, still a very good team, add a game or two to them with the addition of Micah Parsons. I think they just about take over the Vikings to be the second spot in the NFC North. And then obviously that leaves the Bears. We've seen the stories coming out. Caleb Williams, I do want to believe in Caleb Williams. I do want to. But you've seen some of the videos, you've seen some of the reports about what's going on and how Ben Johnson, whilst a good offensive mind, is he quite getting that level across to Caleb Williams as a whole? He's got good weapons. I think he's got a goodish team around him to work. But until that situation is sorted out, the Bears are just gonna be held, back within the, held back within the division. Again, 5-12 last year. We think maybe about the same, maybe a win extra. I don't think is completely out of the realms of possibility. If Ben Johnson does have this, this big, huge jump and impact that we think he can have, but just overall, I think that they still fall way behind the likes of the Packers and the Vikings within the NFC North. And with that, we come to the NFC South, who, for the second year in a row, I just cannot get excited about the NFC South just as a division. Like, so much chaos, and like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the number 1 team. Again, that's we'll just go straight into the standings. The Buccaneers, the Falcons, the Panthers, and then the Saints. I think there's just so much dysfunction around the whole of the NFC South. The Buccaneers, whilst a good team, are not exactly a great team. They will look good because they're going to be beating up on, you know, the Falcons with Michael Penix, effectively a rookie. What's he going to be? Panthers, I still just don't feel great about them as a whole organization. And the Saints going in with what they're, with what they're offering. Uh, whilst I do like Kellen Moore as a head coach, I do think he has good potential. Do I see them making a big leap? No, I don't. So that's just the way that I feel the NFC South is going to fall. I don't want to go again into too much detail because it's pretty straightforward. And again, I just can't be excited or interested about the NFC South. I do think it is possibly the worst division in football. It's the worst division in the NFC. And what's wrong with the South? The South is also the worst division in the AFC. So I don't know what's going on with the South. Maybe they're just too bothered with college football, which is a comment I think I made last year as well. But just as a whole, I just can't get excited about the South in both conferences. But that's how I feel the NFC South is going to be going. Which moves us on to the NFC East, the home of the defending champions, which will make me no surprise to tell you that the Eagles, I do have them as number one in the NFC East, followed by the Commanders, the Cowboys, and the Giants. You can sort of see a bit of a theme with most of them, but again, I don't want it to be this way, but sometimes it is this simple. Just there's one team that's far and above brilliant, and one team that is lacking so far behind that the number one and the number four spot just take care of themselves so easily. So that's why the Giants, again, dysfunctional franchise, are going in number four. Eagles are coming in number one. Then it's the battle between the Commanders and the Cowboys. Again, you look at what was their baseline. What was their base last season? Commanders 12-5, brilliant. Cowboys, you think, okay, could they maybe if things bouncing? Because I do think the Cowboys have a good roster, and if things bounce perfectly for them, I do think there is potential for them to do incredibly well. But then you lose Micah Parsons, that just loses all emphasis for me. As I say, he is someone that can single-handedly win you one or two games, as I do believe he will do for the Packers. So that means you lose a game or two for the Cowboys. And they've punted the way the way they've run themselves. This organization, they are punting on this season. So why should I expect them to be anywhere near any level of competitive, especially within that division with two very good teams in the Eagles and the Commanders? So that's why I've got them in the spot that they are. And then obviously Commanders, brilliant. What's Jaden Daniels going to do in his in his second season? Will there be a sophomore slump? Even if there is, I think there is a lot of talent around him, especially with the addition of Deebo Samuel, to make a very good impression. Do I think they'll challenge directly with the Eagles the way that the Vikings and Lions battled it out last year in the NFC North? No, but I do think it's going to be a very interesting battle at the top of the NFC East, but it's going to be far and away the Eagles and the Commanders. That obviously brings us neatly onto our final division in the NFL, the NFC West, where I'm going to go for the 49ers at 1, the Rams at 2, the Seahawks at 3, and the Cardinals at 4. Now, I'm giving the 49ers a lot of leeway when it comes to, similar to the Detroit Lions, they cannot be impacted by the injuries the way they were last season. I just can't see it happening. And I do think as with a strong roster, I think they will very easily go back to the number one spot within the NFC West. It then comes down to, 2 and 3. The Rams, I think again, what did they lose and what did they gain? Compared to what they did last season, yes, they lost Cooper Kupp, but they got Devontae Adams back in the same spot. So, again, overall, what they lost, what they gained, they're a pretty similar team. Yes, there's some concerns about Matt Stafford and the way he's been handled in preseason. But overall, I think you've got a very strong quarterback, a very strong offense. So I think that will do a very good job competing with the 49ers. And that puts them just ahead of the Seattle Seahawks, who get a good move in Sam Darnold. I think he could be a very good quarterback for them. A good rest of the roster. I did find it incredibly weird the way they handled their offseason, especially with getting rid of DK Metcalf. But not only that, getting Tyler Lockett off the books as well. I found that incredibly strange. That's two big wide receivers you just got rid of. But I do think they're going to be okay. but not great. I do still see them trailing a little bit behind the LA Rams. So that's why that goes 1, 2, 3, and then the Cardinals. Someone has to come forth, and I think it will be them. Right, and that's the teams out of the way. So now we need to head to the individual awards. So this is going to be my guess at who's going to take home what I always like to call the main individual awards at the end of at the end of the season of the NFL honors. I'm not really fussed about, they give like assistant coach of the year, executive of the year. You can't really guess unless you really know what's going on with the charity. You can't really guess what's going on with the Walter Payton man of the year. And comeback player of the year, I've stopped guessing on that just because I'm still not 100% sure what the criteria is. Ever since Damar Hamlin didn't win it after he died on the pitch, and they gave it to Joe Flacco after he came off the couch. So I'm just not going to give comeback player of the year because that voting system just seems far too arbitrary for me to narrow it down. So we'll just go through it. I will start with the rookies of the year. Offensively, I think it's going to be Ashton Genty, the running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. Whilst I think, again, the team is not going to be doing very good, I think he's coming with a certain level of hype, and I think that immediately puts him at the forefront of most people's minds. So, like, mentally, they're going to immediately see something good that he does and, just go overexcited about it. A bit like how Defensive Player of the Year last year went to Miles Garrett because it was already sort of in everyone's mind, the whole pass rush win rate statistic, which I think, there's more to it than that, but it was just in everyone's mind, oh, he's the best at pass rush win rate. Therefore, he must be the best defensive player, even though he didn't, lead the league in any of the main statistics. So same sort of thing. I think Ashton Genty, just because he's come in with such a big level of hype and attention, I think he's gonna take that role. Defensive Rookie of the Year, I'm going to go for Abdul Carter of the New York Giants. Again, another team that's going to be pretty bad, but I think as an edge rusher, I think that's one of the few positions that it's easy to make an instant impact right away. And I think him, especially with all the hype that's gone on around him, wanting to take Lawrence Taylor's number, not being allowed that, then wanting Phil Simms' number, not being allowed that. I think there is still a good level of attention and, again, a good body of work to work with when it comes to Abdul Carter. So that's why I think he's going to take home the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. For Coach of the Year, we'll move on to that next. I think it's going to be Dan Campbell. I do think the Detroit Lions are going to have the best record in the league. And whilst it doesn't always go to the coach with the best record, I just look at if you look at what the Detroit Lions have done, and this would be their third straight year. If my prediction runs true, third straight year of winning the division. Again, I think that's something you can't really ignore, and especially the noise that they like to make and the fact they're a fun team. I don't think anyone dislikes the Detroit Lions. A bit like the Kansas City Chiefs was, people are starting to get a little bit tired of them. The Patriots were people, sort of getting annoyed with the dynasty and the cheating allegation. Everyone, no one really dislikes the Detroit Lions. So by that default, I think Dan Campbell's got himself in a good place again within the media, within the fan landscape. So if he has another successful season, it's going to be something that's hard to ignore on that end. Defensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go Defensive Player next, and because I'm going to stick with the Detroit Lions, I'm going to go with Aiden Hutchinson, one of the best defensive ends, defensive linemen, defensive players in the league. So harsh on not only him but the Detroit Lions that he missed a large part of the end of last season. There was talk that he could be back if they made the Super Bowl, but didn't make it back. But at the time, he was leading the league in sacks, and I think he was leading in tackles as well. So the production is clearly there, and I think he's going to do it. I think sort of along the same lines. I think, again, if the voting system is somewhat fair and we're sticking to what it should be, I would put him as potential candidate for comeback player of the year. But again, we've sort of seen how roles have changed. If Daniel Jones has a good season with the Colts, he may be on it as well, even though, didn't get injured. He was just bad and then struggled and then went. So potential, but I do think it's going to be Aiden Hutchinson for defensive player of the year. For offensive player of the year, now this goes along with the theory that I mentioned last year that they don't want to have the MVP and the offensive player of the year both be quarterbacks because obviously if you're the most valuable player, you are the best player in the league, then you are by default the best player on your side of the ball. So if you're MVP and you're a quarterback, you're by default the best offensive player of the year. You get what I'm saying? But they've sort of gone away with that and sort of moved. Okay, MVP will be a quarterback, and offensive player will be a running back or a wide receiver or a tight end, skill position. So I think that's where we're likely going to go, and as a result, could go Saquon Barkley. I do think we're going to see I say resurgence, but another good year from Derrick Henry behind a very good, Baltimore Ravens offensive line, potentially challenging Saquon Barkley for the league rushing title, and potentially challenging Eric Dickerson. Eric Dickinson, is it Dickerson or Dixon? You know who I mean, for the most yards in the season. But I think it's going to be Derrick Henry. And then MVP, I'm going to go for Jared Goff. Again, I think if the Detroit Lions have the great year that a good year that I expect them to have, Jared Goff is likely going to be a large part of that. And similar to how I believe I said last year that it's someone's time after every year, they've been ignored and ignored, but now, okay, we can't ignore them any longer. I gave the example with, I when I made my pick last year, I picked Micah Parsons to be the defensive player of the year because it was TJ Watt, even though the case could be made for Micah Parsons. Then it was Nick Bosa. Then, in that next conveyor belt, it was going to be Micah Parsons. That was my guess. Obviously, ended up being Myles Garrett. But just along that same line, okay, we've given it to Lamar Jackson, we've given it to Josh Allen. I just think it's, he's given it to Patrick Mahomes. I just think it's Jared Goff's time in that sense. So if he has another great year, I don't think there's any way that the voters are going to be able to ignore Jared Goff as the league's MVP. And with that, that's the end of the prediction show. But as always, I would be remiss if I didn't do my usual thing of taking one story away from the NFL. And there are a number of ones that I could have gone with over the past couple of days, but I'd be stupid not to talk about Bill Belichick and his start at North Carolina. Obviously, not the best start for him, being trounced by TCU. My one takeaway from it was I was watching the game is if Bill Belichick is obsessed and whatever the media narrative, all those years of who was the success and who was the reason for the success of the New England Patriots, was it Bill Belichick or was it Tom Brady? The longer it's going on, the more it's looking like the answer was Tom Brady, because you look at what Bill Belichick was before Tom Brady came in with the Browns and the Patriots, he wasn't a lot. You look at what Bill Belichick was with the Patriots after Tom Brady, not a lot. What was Tom Brady after New England? He went to Tampa without an off season, by the way, because that was the COVID year, without a preseason, without everything, won the Super Bowl in the first year, and then led them to the division crown the next year. All the evidence is pointing that it was Tom Brady. And now, if Bill Belichick can't make a success of what's going on with North Carolina, the evidence is just going to stack up. So I just thought it was funny, and not necessarily funny, but just interesting that arguably, again, what some people say is the greatest coach of all time, Bill Belichick goes in and just gets shellacked in his first game. I thought that was too hard to ignore. But that is really the end of this show. I want to thank you again for sticking with this, and again, if you are still sticking around after the long hiatus and interruption as a result of my son. I do apologize, but thank you very much for sticking around. Don't forget, as always, like, subscribe, or whatever podcast platform you listen to this on. Social medias at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, at MRB Sports Media on Twitter. Go follow on whatever social media platform it is you need to listen out on. That is it. Hopefully, I will be back next week. I'm gonna change it. I'm not gonna promise anything, but hopefully I will be back next week. With the baby. Who knows what I'm going to be able to have the free time to do? But hopefully I'll be back this time next week, talking to you again about what will be coming back off the start of the NFL season and seeing what happens and what transpires in week one. So until next time, if it's next week, if it's not then, whatever. Take care, and as always, stay safe.